Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the 2013 International Policy Conference. Our conference today is on the topic of human rights. And to open up our conference, I would like to introduce our Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Vilas Prabhu.
Thank you, Dr. DeSantis. It's a beautiful, beautiful fall afternoon. It was a beautiful fall morning, and now we have a beautiful fall afternoon. I'm glad to see a lot of students here. Welcome, all of you, Millersville students, faculty, staff, and guests. I am extremely proud to be here to welcome all of you to the 2013 International Policy Conference, Human Rights Across the Globe. I have to tell you, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and it has always been that way. As I was growing up in India, and as you know, India is a country for a long time, used to be referred to as a third world country. Didn't know what that meant, but I knew what the situation on the ground was as I grew up there. But I've been in the United States for 45 years, and then now I'm watching from afar what is going on in the rest of the world. Our international, first of all, let me also say that Dr. John Anderson, our president, was going to be here, but had to leave town on university business to Portland, Oregon, where he is today. But he will be returning back tomorrow. So he's actually very sorry to miss this conference because community service, civic engagement, and international issues are also very dear and near to his heart. So we are missing him today, but I do want to welcome all of you on his behalf as well. Our International Policy Conference is a unique undertaking each year, an opportunity to discuss topics of great importance to our region, the nation, and the world, and an opportunity to bring noted experts and leaders to our campus to engage our faculty and students. As we watch and read the news from across the world each day, we confront the various aspects of human rights in all its forms, from recent atrocities in Syria and civil unrest in other countries to human trafficking and slavery to natural and man-made disasters and the human toll that those events cause. At Millersville, we are dedicated to creating an environment of open and civil discourse where these issues can be brought forward and discussed by all concerned citizens. What is really exciting for me is the wide variety of disciplines that are represented in this discussion over the next 2 days. We are approaching human rights not just from a legal and political perspective, but from a multidisciplinary perspective, including focus on mental health, economic issues, disability rights, and many other issues. I'm excited and proud that we have the opportunity to make human rights a centerpiece of our academic year and continuing discussions on our campus. Enjoy the conference, and thanks again for being part of this campus conversation. At this time, to help frame the issue of human rights for us today, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kirsten Buchmiller, faculty member in the Department of Government and Political Affairs. She wears many, many hats, but that's the most important, crucial position, right? Faculty member. Who also served for over a decade as government and political, over a decade as a director of global partnership and education. Kirsten is also a lead faculty member in our graduate program in emergency management and focuses much of her work on international relations and disaster. Dr. Kirsten Buchmiller. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Prabhu, and welcome everyone to the Human Rights Across the Globe. Please come in. If you want to come and join us, you can. Don't be shy. This is your conference too. Please come join us. I have the honor and privilege of being part of the launch of this important gathering and have been asked to give a bit of intellectual structure to the vast array of panels and lectures that will be taking place over the next day and a half. And in short, I've been asked to answer the question, what exactly is human rights? The global quest for human rights has been a teaching passion and an underpinning of much of my scholarly agenda for over the past 20 years. And at first glance, this conference assignment that I've been given seems like a no-brainer, right? And in fact, the most widely used definition of human rights, and it'll be featured in a video that we'll be showing shortly, is very brief and easy to share. So here it goes. Definition of human rights. The rights we have because we are human. Wouldn't let you get away with that on an essay, right? My job is done, though. Well, as we know in higher education, nothing is ever that straightforward, right? And we are coming here together, as always, to dig deeper than what's on the surface. So let's start with that human side of the equation. It's this idea that rights are held by all of us as humans. Doesn't matter whether we're a citizen of a certain country, whether we are a member of an economic class, whether we are in a particular organization or a member of a prominent family. We're human, we have it, period. The problem is, as many of you already know where I'm going, throughout the course of human history and throughout our world today and in this country, the essential humanity of our community has been denied among many of our forebears and members of our global community currently. If we want to be dramatic, we would just have to look at the institution of slavery, the age of colonialism, the devastation of genocide, and that's certainly a massive piece of it. But we can also see that history and our daily life today is replete with oppression and denial of protections against those who belong to a certain race, an ethnic group, a faith group, a political party, women, children, those with disabilities, if you are poor, if you love someone of the same gender, if you are an immigrant, if you struggle with mental illness. In all of these instances, and regrettably many more in the 21st century, despite all of our advances, of which I believe there are many, we've been regarded as less than human. And that rights thing is also not so straightforward, I have to say. By rights, we mean entitlements and protections that cannot be renounced or forfeited or lost. They are, in our own legal and political context, inalienable, and they cannot be taken or given away. Very good, right? Very straightforward. But if we begin to ask, what does our ideal list look like? Is it about basic human needs, or is it about something more? Is it about imbuing life with a certain level of dignity? It gets a little more interesting. So I'm going to take a quick informal poll before our United Nations Human Rights Officer joins the conversation. And I'd like you to indicate in some way, raise your hand, whatever. Do we have an inalienable right to free speech and expression? Do you believe we have that? Yeah, makes sense, feels comfortable, right? How about to worship freely in the religious faith of our choosing? How about peaceful assembly? Do you think being able to gather together? To elect our leaders? Does that sound good? How about a right to a free education through the college level? Where did all your hands go? Do you think you have a right to a free education? Do you have a right? Do you have a right to housing? Okay, a couple of hands. To a job? Do you have a right to a job? To paid family leave? A right to marry? A right to health care? Okay, a few, but not many. Well, those last 6 went way beyond the US Bill of Rights, didn't they? But the fact of the matter is that in many constitutions throughout the world, those are the fundamental rights. So now we'll see, both in the conversation that starts today, and as I said, this particular video we're going to show you, it gets a little bit more complex because actually there are many camps, approaches, and divides. Of course, we have the school, the philosophy, that those are all your essential human rights. As a South African colleague said to me, I'm so glad I can say whatever I want, but I'm homeless and I'm starving. So are those rights, and do they need to be addressed? Let me add one more layer of complexity. A political cartoon in the local newspaper the other day had a rather stereotypical picture of a starving child with an empty bowl in front of him in Mystery Country X, another place, land of another place outside the United States. And underneath it, it said, believe it or not, there are places in the world where getting the newest iPhone is not a priority. This, of course, was meant to remind us that life as we see it in front of us here in Millersville, Pennsylvania, and in Lancaster County, is not the reality that much of the rest of the world experiences. And this is true in many cases, including in the area of human rights. But we need to make no mistake about it. While the United States has often been a champion for human rights around the globe, abuses can and do happen very close to home. It's not just something that happens over there and far away. And during this conference, we will see examples of challenges to our rights on all levels, local through global. So in defining this term and endeavoring to outline the content of human rights, we've stumbled across a number of challenges, haven't we? And accordingly, the conversation about human rights remains vigorous, contested, active, and global. This conference is Millersville's way of participating in that worldwide dialogue. And don't worry, if you're human, you're eligible to join the chat. Okay? Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure and honor to introduce a representative from the United Nations who's joining us by Skype. As often happens as we live in our bubble, things like Syria tend to cause us to lose our major speakers, particularly because we're in the opening of the UN General Assembly, the first full week in the United Nations in New York. But the UN has kindly agreed to still join us using 21st century technology. So we are going to be joined now by Ms. Martina Donlin, a human rights officer at the United Nations. Her focal point is human rights, specifically sustainable development, which is an interesting conversation as we'll look at with regard to poverty and human rights. And before joining the UN, she worked for the Council on Foreign Relations, the Permanent Mission of Switzerland to the UN, and the Wall Street Journal in New York. She attended the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University in Boston and the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, and not very common in the States, is fluent in German, French, as well as English. And Ms. Donlin is going to talk about what's happening this week at the United Nations with the convening of the world's leaders for the General Assembly and how human rights is playing a very big part of that. Hello, Ms. Donlin, can you hear us?
Hello, I can hear you.
Welcome to Millersville University, even if only virtually.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be able to be with you virtually.
Well, we're thrilled you could join us, and we've just talked a little bit about what are human rights, and per our previous discussion, we thought you could tell us a little bit about what's going on at the UN this week that taps into many of the themes that we'll be looking at. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm delighted to say a few words to you since your conference is covering so many very important issues, many of which we're discussing at the UN right now. As you know, this is one of the busiest weeks, actually the busiest week of the year here at the UN, with about 193 presidents, prime ministers, and foreign ministers here. So a lot of meetings are going on, a lot of events, bilateral meetings, multilateral meetings, and a lot of them touch on human rights or are actually focused on human rights. And many of them actually on issues that you're covering, like disability, LGBT, poverty. So I was just going to mention a few to give you some examples of our work. For instance, going on right now, just a few floors above me, is the first ever ministerial meeting at the foreign minister level on violence and discrimination of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. This is, the LGBT issue is sort of a new frontier in the human rights movement, at least here at the UN, because as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of resistance still on the part of many countries, many governments. So it's still a touchy issue, but our officials like the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights have been very outspoken and are insisting that everyone is born free and equal. That's why actually our campaign on LGBT is called Free and Equal, and that human rights are universal. So this is going on right now with Secretary of State John Kerry in attendance and a number of foreign ministers from Europe, Latin America, and Asia. Another topic that was on the agenda was on Monday. There was a high-level meeting on persons with disabilities, and world leaders came together in a whole-day event to discuss how to improve access to education, access to employment, healthcare, social services, etc., for people with disabilities. This is also a rather newer, I would say, newer topic in the human rights agenda of the UN, but one that's becoming stronger and stronger. We have a convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. That was a big success for the disabilities movement. And we have spokespeople like Stevie Wonder, who was here. He himself blind, of course, but he's a big advocate for the rights of persons with all kinds of disabilities. So he spoke here today. He didn't sing, unfortunately, but he did give a concert in December. He actually gave a concert here, which was fantastic. So we're lucky to have a few celebrities helping us, get our messages out, which always helps. Then, of course, the poverty and the Millennium Development Goals is always very big on the UN agenda. As you know, the deadline for the Millennium Development Goals is 2015, so it's coming up really soon. So there was a big meeting looking at the progress we've made and what we can still achieve in the remaining 2 years, and also looking ahead to what other goals we should set after that to continue the effort to reduce extreme poverty and improve health, and so on. So that was actually that meeting was not just talk, but there were some specific pledges. $2.5 billion was pledged by foundations, businesses, governments, in support of activities to improve healthcare, education, culture, all things to help us achieve the MDGs, or at least some of them, by 2015. So there's a big push on that still, and the MDGs overall have been a big success story overall, and we want to continue the effort beyond 2015. And poverty and human rights, as you know, of course, are very clearly interlinked, and the right to health, the right to education, and so on are all social and economic rights that are part of the overall human rights. So there's an important link there. Maybe one other event I could mention was more on the legal front. We had again Secretary of State John Kerry and 20 other foreign ministers who signed an arms trade treaty yesterday. And the arms trade treaty is actually the newest international treaty here at the UN. and it prohibits this, the transfer of conventional weapons like tanks, missiles, warships, to areas where there's a high risk of mass atrocities. So signing on to this treaty is really a victory for human rights. The fact that the biggest arms exporter, the US, has signed on. Of course, it still needs to go through the Senate in order for the US to actually be able to become party to the treaty. But at least we have the signature, as well as over 100 other countries that signed on. So that's you know, a step towards reducing mass atrocities. We're talking about, you know, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, situations like we're seeing in Syria right now that hopefully potentially in the future could be prevented through treaties like that that prohibit the transfer of arms into such countries. So that's a variety of things going on right now, or have been going on this week. There's a lot more to come, and of course, year-round we look at human rights here at the UN. Human rights, as you know, is one of the main pillars of the UN's work, as defined in the Charter of the UN. And actually, we're celebrating two big anniversaries here at the UN related to human rights. One is the 65th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I'm sure you've heard of, is the milestone document for the human rights movement. It was adopted by the General Assembly in 1948. And the other big anniversary is the 20th anniversary of the office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. The High Commissioner right now is Mrs. Navi Pillay from South Africa. She's the fifth High Commissioner right now. And her office is in charge of the promotion and protection of human rights worldwide. So the office has existed for 20 years, and we're sort of looking back at what it has achieved and where we will go from here. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say, or maybe just looking ahead to next year. Next year will be an important year. We have among all the other issues, we have two big issues coming up here at the UN. One is the 20th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda, which happened in 1994, where almost 1 million people lost their lives. Honestly, a miserable failure for the UN. So we're looking back at that. What happened? How could it have been prevented? What could we have done better? That's an important sort of milestone coming up in April. And the other issue we'll be focusing on is actually the rights of indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples, they exist all over the world. I think there are about 300 million of them who still live in tribes and according to their traditional cultures. And their rights are very often infringed upon. And there will be the first ever high-level governmental meeting here at the UN on indigenous rights, indigenous peoples' rights in September 2014. So that's coming up. So I think that's probably enough for you to digest via Skype. I want to just say I wish you a really good conference. I think you're addressing a lot of very important issues, and it's very timely and very important. And I hope you'll all be inspired to become human rights advocates, and not only to keep studying, but also to become agents of change and to put into practice everything you're learning. So good luck, and stay tuned to what's going on at the UN.
Again, my appreciation to the Department of Public Information for releasing you for a brief period of time during this extraordinary historic week, and we'll be following the news that comes out of the UN as the opening session wraps up. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, and good luck.
All right, so we're going to continue our march on of our introductory kind of plenary here with a film that I often use in my human rights course that we think will continue to kind of build our appreciation. It's only about 9 minutes, and then we're going to move on to then something very, very special that's more live than this, but we'll start with that film first that taps into many of the themes we've already raised.
Human rights is, geez, that's a good question.
Human rights. Well, that's a tough one.
Wow.
I don't even know how to give that a definition.
I would probably have to do a little bit of homework or something.
Any right that I think just as a normal, human,
The rights that humans have.
Oh, that's a very large debate.
Tú le puedes preguntar a 20 personas y te van a dar 20 diferentes opiniones.
Non saprei, una domanda complicatissima.
Yes, we just take them for granted that they're there, but we don't even consider what they are.
Human rights are the rights you have simply because you're human. It's how you instinctively expect and deserve to be treated as a person, like the right to live freely, to speak your mind, and to be treated as an equal. There are many kinds of rights. Most apply to a certain group. But human rights are the only ones that apply to absolutely everyone, everywhere. That means kids, old people, poor people, basketball players, garbage men, rappers, teachers, Africans, Indians, Albanians, Christians, Muslims, Kabbalists, atheists, your mom, your dad, your next door neighbor, and you all have the exact same human rights. In other words, they're universal. But the question remains, what are they?
Name the human rights?
What the human rights are?
The right to live.
Equality between all peoples.
Right to religion, the right to...
Is there supposed to be a list somewhere I should be aware of?
According to the United Nations, there are a total of 30 human rights, which are usually lumped together and called simply human rights. They're all listed out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the world's most widely accepted document on the subject. But it was a long time in coming. At first, there were no human rights. If you were in with the right crowd, you were safe. If you weren't, well, you weren't. But then a guy named Cyrus the Great decided to change all that. After conquering Babylon, he did something completely revolutionary. He announced that all slaves were free to go. He also said people had the freedom to choose their religion, no matter what crowd they were a part of. They documented his words on a clay tablet known as the Cyrus Cylinder. And just like that, human rights were born. The idea spread quickly to Greece, to India, and eventually to Rome. They noticed that people naturally followed certain laws, even if they weren't told to. They called this natural law, but it kept getting trampled on by those in power. Not until 1,000 years later in England did they finally get a king to agree that no one can overrule the rights of the people, not even a king. People's rights were finally recognized, and they were now safe from those in power. Kind of. It still took a bunch of British rebels declaring their independence before the king got the point that all men are created equal. Which isn't to say he liked the idea, but he couldn't stop that, and America was born. The French immediately followed with their own revolution for their own rights. Their list was even longer, and they insisted that these rights weren't just made up. They were natural. The Roman concept of natural law had become natural rights. Unfortunately, not everyone was so thrilled. In France, a general named Napoleon decided to overthrow the new French democracy and crown himself emperor of the world. He almost succeeded. But the countries of Europe joined forces and defeated him. Human rights was again a hot topic. They drew up international agreements, broadly granting many rights across Europe. But only across Europe. The rest of the world somehow still didn't qualify. Instead, they got invaded, conquered, and consumed by Europe's massive empires. But then a young lawyer from India decided enough was enough. His name was Mahatma Gandhi, And in the face of violence, he insisted that all people of Earth had rights, not just in Europe. Eventually, even Europeans started to agree. But it wasn't going to be that easy. 2 world wars erupted. Hitler exterminated half the Jewish population of Earth in horrifying Nazi death camps. And all told, 90 million people died. Never had human rights been so terrifyingly close to extinction. And never had the world been more desperate for change. So the countries of Earth banded together and formed the United Nations. Their basic purpose was to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. But what were human rights? Were they the proclamations of Cyrus, the natural laws of Rome, the declarations of France? Everyone seemed to have a slightly different idea of what human rights should be. But under the supervision of Eleanor Roosevelt, they finally agreed on a set of rights that applied to absolutely everyone. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The French concept of natural rights had finally become human rights. So, in summary, at first, only a few lucky people had any rights, until one of those guys decided, hey, other people should have some rights too, which was great, except not everyone agreed. And it only took a few thousand years of fighting and declarations and more fighting until everyone finally agreed that human rights should apply to everyone. And they all lived happily ever after. Except for one little problem. If people have the right to food and shelter, why are 16,000 children dying of starvation every day? 1 every 5 seconds. If people have freedom of speech, why are thousands in prison for speaking their minds? If people have the right to education, why are over 1 billion adults unable to read? If slavery has truly been abolished, why are 27 million people still enslaved today? More than twice as many as in 1800. The fact is, when it was signed, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights did not have the force of law. It was optional. And despite many more documents, conventions, treaties, and laws, it's still little more than words on a page. So the question is, who will make those words a reality?
I have a dream today.
When Dr. King marched for racial equality, he was marching for rights that had been guaranteed by the United Nations for almost 2 decades. But still, he marched. When Nelson Mandela stood up for social justice in the 1990s, his country had already agreed to abolish such discrimination for almost 40 years. But still, he fought. Those who fight today against torture, poverty, and discrimination are not giants or superheroes. They're people. Kids, mothers, fathers, teachers. Free-thinking individuals who refuse to be silent. Who realize that human rights are not a history lesson. They're not words on a page. They're not speeches or commercials or PR campaigns. They are the choices we make every day as human beings. They are the responsibility we all share to respect each other, to help each other, and to protect those in need. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere.
Well, I'm thrilled. I hope that you enjoyed that clip, but now we're in for a true delight. I would like to bring to the front my colleague Barry Kornhauser and his very special organization and performance group, M Youth. This is a group that has won national recognition and is an extraordinary nexus of many of these issues that we care so much about. And I'm going to let Barry, an MU colleague, introduce what you will be doing. Welcome.
Well, thank you everybody for having us here. We feel very honored to be part of this important conference. M Youth Theater is an ensemble of local young people from widely different backgrounds who work together to create plays designed to increase awareness and understanding of social justice and human rights issues. This is about a quarter of the full group, those who were able to come and be part of this today. We chose to share with you just a handful of material for some of our past works. Short scenes, a couple of songs, one today, one tomorrow, mostly monologues that we hope may shine a little light on some of the topics this conference will explore, and also perhaps spark some conversation. MU theater plays typically tell true stories of young people pretty much the same age as the ensemble members. It's a demographic that is terribly vulnerable to human rights abuses. That's all across the globe, including in the United States. This first story indeed does take place in the United States, very close to home. It's based on a personal experience of one of the ensemble members. And it comes from our most recent work, a play called Pieces, which this summer was invited to be the keynote presentation at the National Annual Conference of the American Alliance for Theater and Education in Washington, D.C. These guys rocked the conference there. It's a play about youth violence, the kinds of violence that young people perpetrate on other young people, and also the kinds of violence they sometimes inflict upon themselves. This moment from the play looks at LGBTQIA equality, or sadly, all too often, its lack thereof. So here we go.
I stayed quiet for a long time, but I hated living a lie. So one day, I decided to tell a classmate, someone who had been my best friend since 2nd grade.
Gay as in happy?
No, gay as in I like girls. That didn't go over too well.
But that's a sin, an abomination against the Lord.
And soon, he began quoting me scripture.
Leviticus 18:22, do not
What
lie
are you
with—
doing? I thought you were my friend.
I am your friend. That's why I want to help you.
Look, if you really want to help, maybe you can join me in starting a gay-straight alliance here at school.
No way!
That didn't happen. My principal refused to allow me to use the school building for any meetings. Any LGBT activities I suggested were blocked or censored. Even my posters were torn down. And things only got worse.
Look, I'm sorry, but my parents don't want me hanging out with you anymore. But I'm still going to pray for you and tell everyone else at school to do the same.
I think they must have misunderstood the word pray. It seemed I became their prey, their victim. I was relentlessly tormented. They'd scream, "God hates lesbians!" And I'd scream back, "God doesn't hate anyone!" Or if anything, God hates hate!
Yeah.
They didn't listen. I was cursed at, spit on, my books were torn apart, thrown away. They shoved me into lockers and garbage cans, and they routinely beat the crap out of me. And school officials didn't intervene. One time, a teacher did try to help me file a complaint. What? But all that happened was that she was disciplined, told she was a bad fit, and one day, she was gone. When they found out I was planning on bringing a girl to the prom, and that they couldn't legally stop me, they canceled the prom.
What?
Needless to say, school became a living hell for me. That's when I decided to
Perhaps because politics has been so much in the news lately, this next piece seemed especially pertinent to us. Voter ID laws have drawn controversy by civil rights groups who note that they disenfranchise minority populations. But voting rights of the people with behavioral health diagnoses have not been in the forefront of this debate, even though laws in more than half of the states mean that some people can't cast a ballot simply because they're living with a disability. We call this little sequence the voter.
My name is Albert. I'm an American citizen, and I'm 19 years old. Almost 20, old enough to vote. I was looking forward to voting for the president in 2012, but I didn't. My states and 29 others are allowed to deny the voting rights to people with intellectual disability.
And other behavioral health diagnoses. Restrictions can apply to a wide range of disorders, including schizophrenia, Down syndrome,
bipolar disorder,
and autism.
But these restrictions are rooted in a historical misunderstanding about people with these kinds of disability. The idea that they should be institutionalized, kept safe, and be cared for, and stereotypes that only make for more discrimination.
Those people cannot express a preference. Their rationality is impaired.
They are susceptible to undue influence.
So their votes will only be taken advantage of.
But that's not true. I watch the news, and I go to town hall meetings to learn about candidates. I can make an informed decision, and I deserve the same rights as other Americans, and the right to vote. I have a voice, and I want to be heard of. It feels good knowing I can help make a difference.
People with disabilities should be able to participate in all parts of community life, including voting. Last time, I didn't vote because I was discouraged by people at the poll, how they talked down at me. Next time, I bring someone with me to feel more comfortable, and I'm hoping that will be Albert.
You got my vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I'm happy to report that Pennsylvania is not one of the 30 states with those discriminatory laws. This next piece comes from the pages of Disposable People. It's a Pulitzer Prize-nominated book by a Dr. Kevin Bales, who's the head of a group called Free the Slaves, a Washington, D.C.-based contemporary abolitionist organization. The MU Theater typically works with local, regional, and national partners in developing work. And we worked with Dr. Bales to create a play we called Chain Reaction. It's an exploration of the scourge of slavery in the modern world in all its insidious forms. The story you're about to hear, like all the others today, is a true story, and like all the others, it's spoken in the actual words of the person who lived it. In this case, a young boy abducted into the military. We call this piece Dancing from the Dark.
My parents named me Davo, and today, I'm Davo again. But when I was 8, I left our village in Sierra Leone to look for my father, who had been taken by the Revolutionary United Front. He was a dancer in our village, but the RUF promised him a better life, a better way for him to provide for his family. As I set off, RUF soldiers caught me along the road and told me that if I did not do as they said, that they would harm my father. I was forced to become a soldier. We patrolled the mine around the clock, while my father and many others dug for diamonds from 18 to 20 hours a day. The officers give us alcohol and drugs, marijuana, white capsules of amphetamines, and brown, which was cocaine mixed with gunpowder. They sliced open our arms and stuffed the wounds with cocaine. At first, this combination of drugs made me sick, but later it made me fierce. I was no longer Davo. I became the Dark Destroyer. I felt like I was on fire. But at the same time, I felt dead inside. I was forced to chop off the hands of miners who did not perform well, scaring others into working harder. One day, my father got a bad cut while digging. He developed tetanus, and guards dragged him through the dirt and threw him into a shallow pit when he was not yet dead. countless times a day, I'd walk past that grave, where my father lay with many others. I wanted to join him there, but soon, I was coming alive inside. I wanted only to live to honor him. Then came a day when opportunity appeared. The officers got very drunk and fell asleep. I ran with 2 other guards for a week. We encountered a family who had contact with a human rights organization, which helped us get to safety. Now, I'm in school, and like my father before me, I've begun to dance. When I do, I close my eyes, and I'm back in my village, laughing with my father. Instead of lifting rifles, I lift spirits.
Coffee beans and human beings are the subjects of the next 2 true life stories from 2 different parts of the world. They paint a vivid portrait of the way human rights abuses are perpetrated on young people in what can only loosely be described as work environments. A more apt description might be the word suggested by one of the young people you're about to meet, and the word she used was nightmare.
My name is Drisa. I left my family in Mali to look for work, since in my village there are very few jobs. I crossed the border to the Ivory Coast, where I was offered a good job on a coffee plantation.
I am Altana. I was 12 and my sister 11 when we were offered jobs working in the mining towns of the Brazilian Amazon. We were told we'd be working at a restaurant that served the mines. We never even saw the restaurant. Instead, we were forced to work at a brothel. We could not contact our family for help.
Before long, that job became a nightmare. We were forced to spend long days tending the plants and collecting the coffee beans. The work was backbreaking. The heat was oppressive. We were given only braised bananas to eat. Weak from hunger, we staggered under heavy baskets of coffee beans. If we slowed down at work, we were beaten. At night, they locked us all into a small room with only a tin can to use as a toilet.
My sister refused to have sex with the gold miner. He decapitated her, rode around in a speedboat, showing off her head to the other miners, who clapped and cheered. I still had to have sex with those men, unless I wanted to share my sister's fate.
One morning, I attempted to escape, but a slaveholder caught me and he savagely beat me. The next day, I still had to work, even though the wounds from the beating were still raw. I was trapped 300 miles from home.
After a long time, I managed to escape the brothel where I was held. I was so happy when I found my way to the police, but they did not protect me. Instead, they brought me right back to the brothel, beating me all the way. I learned I was lucky, that some girls don't even survive encounters with the police.
Eventually, all of us on the plantation were rescued by an official of the Malian government. We were given medical care and a safe place to stay until we can return home. Because of our stories, human rights organizations have helped to convince the world's coffee companies to end slavery in their production. But you know what? I've never even tasted coffee.
I would rather be dead with my sister than continue working at the brothel. So I attempted another escape, and I succeeded, rescued by a kind nun who took me in. She is helping me to heal, but it is hard to learn to trust. And I don't know if I'll ever really feel safe.
As part of the, oh, thank you, girls. As part of the advocacy agenda of the MU Theater program, all our performances are free of charge to make them as widely accessible as possible, but we always collect free will donations for a recipient chosen by the ensemble usually related to the topic of the play. And when we're dealing with slavery, Kevin Bale told us that in modern day, you can buy someone's freedom for as little as $20. And these guys raised $5,000, and they felt very proud of how many people's lives they impacted through that. Yeah. We're going to close today with two separate looks at the immigration and refugee experience. The first is done in a humorous vein, and we thought a lighter touch might be appreciated by now. Linguistic human rights is a fascinating topic all on its own. In this little piece, which comes from a play we called For We Were Strangers in the Land, this piece plays with language to give you, the audience, a feel of what it must be like to be a refugee, finding yourself in a new country where you can't understand a single word that is spoken.
When I was 10, I came to America and started school. I had dark skin and spoke Nepali. My first month, I couldn't understand anyone, and there wasn't anyone to translate. Do you know what that is like, not to understand anything? Here, listen.
Oh, Velcro! Buplas, these people's fresh class.
Up! Hello, my name is Raj Nandani.
Ibasi Jo Raj Rompapla.
Excuse me, I don't understand.
Oh, Edith Rompapla.
Rumplapla.
Up Nax. Flape. Easy.
Flapisi. Flapisi. Flapisi.
Forget it! Pupla Stantan for a prom da allegiance.
I prom allegiance, do da wavy spangler,
rock the jointed stars, rock the marigold.
I don't understand. I do not speak English. Does anyone know Nepali? Help! Finally, after about a month, some kid did make an effort to be nice to me. She even tried to teach me some English.
The refugee farmer uses a plow to make his dough.
They say the same, but don't have the same sounds. How can anyone learn this language?
It's rough.
Thanks, guys. Clear the chairs. We're going to flip it out now.
We were all reminded today that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written in 1948. Well, to end today's presentation, we'd like to share with you a song that was also written back in 1948, and by Woody Guthrie. It was his response to a real-life incident. Sadly, 65 years later, the song remains all too relevant, and it spoke to us of the plight of a certain immigrant group today. Again, we want to thank you for welcoming us so warmly, and we'll briefly see you again at the end of the day tomorrow. But now, deportee.
Crops are all in and the peaches are rotting. The oranges pile in their gray domes. They're flying on back to the Mexican border to pay all their money
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you so much. Barry, this is great. This is what an inspiration. What a creative influence you have. Young people, outstanding. What talent, what courage, what creativity. Great work, everybody. Give another round of applause, please.